just so that we can begin on time for the most part and end on time today. Thank you for introducing yourselves, continuing to do that in the chat. So my name is Dawn Como. As you know, I'm going to say more about myself in a minute. You can see from the slide here, I'm a faculty member at Emory University, and I spend a lot of time talking about mentoring, and I am thrilled to be kicking off and launching our second annual series on mentorship for the track here at Emory, and also to all of our partners who work across the world and across the United States in different track locations. If you would, thank you for letting us know a little bit about who you are in the chat. Please feel free to do that. Um, I'm curious also if you could continue to answer where you're from in the poll in front of us. I can see one person still from Uganda, a few from India, some from Georgia, some from the United States. Please go ahead and continue to let us know. You can see that this is the Emory track locations, but I think as we've reached out and corresponded and collaborated with additional tracks, that we've probably even added some additional locations, and we'll continue to see who logs in and who joins us to talk about mentorship and research mentorship in TB. And hopefully we can continue to build our networks across different sites. And that really leads us to the purpose of this series. I'm going to start today by give a little background, and then in subsequent sessions, we'll jump right into content a little bit. But the purpose here really is to strengthen TB research capacity by increasing mentorship knowledge and skills, and to build networks of TB researchers and mentors across international institutions. And you can see that we have 5 events planned. And this is our first one today, the Foundations of Mentoring. And then we'll move into subsequent sessions, one in August on setting expectations between mentors and mentees and sharing some important tools to strengthen relationships, cross-cultural mentoring and mentoring across country, virtually e-mentoring, also cross-cultural mentoring or mentoring across difference within our own institutions and countries. Then we're going to host a panel with some experienced mentors about best practices and lessons they've learned. And then we'll also then move into our session in November, which broadens our look at mentorship in terms of how to think about it from an institutional or a programmatic perspective. So lots of good stuff. And for those of you, some of you on the call know me already, but for those of you who don't, I've been working across a number of research training programs now for a number of years here at Emory and also internationally, particularly with a focus on some research training programs in Ethiopia. And that includes a text I was able to write with colleagues, and you can go ahead and add that to the chat right now. It's available for free in a PDF. And although we aren't using it explicitly or implicitly today, we are referencing it, and you can use it. It has additional information about mentorship. So that PDF is available for you free in the chat, and we'll also send it to you at the end of the session today. So I wanted just to start by saying I really love doing this work. I've been talking about mentorship for about 10 years across, as I've mentioned, a number of different research training programs related to TB and other topical areas in Georgia, Nigeria, virtually, and some programs in India as well as Vietnam and Cambodia, and right here in the United States. And I really try to think about mentorship from an intersectional perspective, meaning that we all bring different identities and experiences into mentorship. And that's really important in how we think about our own strategies of being a mentor. And also how we show up as a mentee. And so more to that in the next couple of slides. But I did want to say just a bit about who I am as an Emory faculty member and how I've worked now for about a decade thinking through how to improve mentoring capacity in a number of different settings. And very influential to how I approach this series, how we think about it as researchers, broadly, I think throughout the track, as well as through other different international programs, is really thinking about mentorship from the perspective of the social ecological model. And so throughout this series, you'll note that we really are probably talking more about individual level aspects of mentorship and relationship levels of mentorship today in some of our sessions. But we do, as I mentioned in our timeline, get to kind of this larger, like, how do we think about mentorship from a institutional level or a community level or a policy level, so that we're sure that when we're thinking about individual mentors and mentees, we are supporting them through skills and training and policies that really augment and sustain mentoring efforts across institutions. So again, this is a larger framework that will kind of influence and guide the subsequent sessions we have together. All right, let's see. Anybody else log in? Want to let us know where you're from? And then I'm going to go ahead and end this poll, but it does look like we have a representation of a couple of different countries. For those of you who just logged in, please say hello to us in the chat. Let us know who you are and what you're doing, and tell us where you're from. We'd like to have, we love that we have an opportunity to work across a number of different countries and researchers in this short time we have together this morning. Okay, so now I'm going to pause for a minute too, as folks are getting logged in, and I would like to hear from you a little bit about your mentoring experience. So if you can see this new poll in front of you right now, it asks, are you currently a mentor? Yes, no, or maybe, or are you currently a mentee? Please let us know. We'd love to know a little bit about who's on the call and about your experiences. So please take time to answer questions. Okay, so as you're filling that out, it looks like about half and half in terms of mentors and mentees, and many of you mentees. I love that mentees are logging in, because what I found in doing these sessions, although we're talking about mentoring broadly, is that really everything we're talking about will help you so much as a mentee, because being a mentee does require agency and responsibilities. And I think while we're thinking about mentorship and what a mentor's role in, you will also learn how to be a better mentee. And so what we'll do today is really launch into talking about some basic definitions. I give definitions no matter whom I'm speaking with, because I want everyone to be on the same page on what we mean. And then we're going to move into some of the research that shows the benefits of mentorship and a little bit about what mentoring characteristics and roles look like. Hoping we get through everything today. If not, there'll be a few leftover slides you can look through on your own when we share the materials after the session. Okay, so let's see. Looks like most of you have answered the poll in terms of your mentoring experience. 27 out of 29 are currently a mentee, and about half and half. It looks like our mentors, some of you may be in the maybe category, learning even today what qualifies as mentorship, or maybe you're easing into mentorship, or maybe it's informal mentorship. And so I appreciate those maybes, because I have also been in that experience myself, where I think maybe I'm mentoring someone, but I'm not sure. So we'll talk more about that in the time we have today. Thank you for answering those polls. Okay. So let's move ahead. I would love to hear from you in the chat, and we will mostly use the chat today as people have challenges with technology sometimes. But I would love to hear from you, just one-word answers if you'd like, how you, from your experience, given that half of you at least are mentors, how would you define or describe mentorship? Please go ahead and add some words into the chat here. No right or wrong answers, just kind of brainstorming. How would you define or describe mentorship? Go ahead. I'm going to stop talking for a minute while you write. How would you define or describe mentorship? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Okay, great. Some really good answers coming in here. Guidance, teaching, quality guidance. That's so important, right? Because not all guidance is helpful guidance if it's not on target, or if it's not really relatable to our mentees. So I appreciate that. Support, advocacy, that is a really key component. Supporting career development, role modeling, encouragement, getting people to go in the right direction, all very important parts of mentorship. Guidance, again, yes, that's a key theme and a key role of mentorship. Support for growth, very important, right? We do want people to grow in their careers and hopefully personally too. That's really important, Crystal. Thank you for adding that. Finding resources. Sometimes we forget how valuable it is to have a mentor who has the access to resources that we may not know about as mentees. Mutual learning experience, really important, right? Mentees teaching up to their mentors, growing together. I really like that component. Thank you for sharing that. Any other answers or descriptions of mentorship? Please go ahead and add them to the chat. Let's see. Okay. So as you've already mentioned, this really is how we think about mentorship, and the literature defines mentorship in a variety of ways, but with some core components. And I do like this definition that you're seeing in front of you right now, that is adapted from the American Psychological Association's original definition in 2006 and written about in an article by Lanzi et al. In 2019, focused on how we think about mentoring the next kind of generation of scientists from doctoral level up through kind of more junior faculty. And as you can see here in this definition, they pull out some different functions, particularly of mentorship. So one, as a start, saying that a mentor themselves is an individual with expertise who can help develop the career of a mentee or someone who's less experienced. And that we, or the APA specifically, the American Psychological Association, really thinks about it in terms of supporting a mentee through career-related functions. So providing advice to enhance a mentee's professional performance and development, skills, knowledge, guidance. Also, the psychosocial function being really important, a role model and support system for the mentee. And that throughout this relationship, there'll be explicit lessons. So really skills taught, advice given that's very concrete, written down from the research, method, for example, research methods, all of that, policies that are important to help their mentees understand, ethical issues that are important for their mentees to understand. And then those lessons that are less formal. So things like, how do you get along in a team? It might not be written down, but they're sharing really important information. How do you go through the promotion process? Sure, there's policies written down, but what's that informal knowledge that's not written down that's important to share and provide as a support network for your mentee? This might also include things like how you balance your work life with your home life. There's also many areas of mentorship. There's more coming on in the slides in a bit, but really thinking about comprehensively the areas that mentors can support their mentees in research, teaching, and service. I mentioned already that can be done very formally as well as kind of informal knowledge, and that many of you on this call who are mentors or mentees may be working with mentoring teams. So often we do need more than one mentor to guide us through life. And I talk a bit more about this in our next session when I show a mentor map and the various ways we can think about building networks of support and mentors for mentees. So I really also like this definition. I'm going to share this website with you at the end of the slideshow. This text, The Science of Effective Mentorship, which came out by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, has a great website and a great text that synthesizes a lot of the research on mentorship. And as this quote says in front of you, mentorship is a professional working alliance in which individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. So again, those two elements. But I like that this definition gets a little bit more of that mutual relationship, which somebody already mentioned in the chat, and that people can learn from each other. I wanted to stop for a minute and also just define what I meant by mentee. I know there's a range of people on this call, some of you who have probably been mentoring for a long time, and those of you who might be new at this. And so mentor, of course, is the more experienced person, but when I use the term mentee, I'm referring to that person who is being mentored, and that could be a student, a trainee, a scholar, a faculty, even an administrator or a staff. And so the mentor is the one with the more experience who is kind of leading the sharing of knowledge, but a mentee who has equal responsibility in the relationship and is the one who is often less experienced in a point in their career where they really want to accelerate, with support from a mentor to achieve their career goals. So they're seeking the guidance and the advice and support from their mentor, and they're actively participating in this process, right, with their mentor by seeking this support and guidance, the word that many of you mentioned in the chat. And really, this relationship is and should be built on this trust, respect, and mutual commitment to each other between the mentor and the mentee. I'm just going to pause for a second and say, any questions so far about that definition, or that you'd like to write in the chat, or anything that's you see missing that might be important to add? I want to go back to the previous comment about assessing a mentee's strengths and weaknesses. I think that really is important. And a relationship that's built on mutual trust allows a space for the mentee to be vulnerable and share those concerns they might have about their skill areas or their skill weaknesses, as well as possible missteps that they might take. Taking missteps and mistakes and really even failures is part of the learning process. So a strong mentorship allows a space for a mentee to have those experiences. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Please, I will keep my eye on the chat if you have questions. So I also wanted to pull forward this idea of inclusive mentoring and culturally aware mentoring, particularly because we have an international group here. And also this term really is used a bit in the United States, but I bring it forward to say is one way we can think about mentoring across different identities, social identities, across different cultural backgrounds. And really, we've thought a lot about this in the recent years, particularly in the United States, of really how we reach out and build diverse mentoring styles to accommodate people from different cultural backgrounds. And in the United States, the context here, thinking about who has had access traditionally to higher education and research careers, but also who's had access to mentoring. And our research has said that typically people of color in the United States, people who haven't had the opportunity to go through higher ed, don't have as much mentoring, or if they're the first person in their family to attend college, what we refer to as first generation, that these are folks who have not had access to mentoring and research careers the way other groups have. And so we've spent a lot of time in the United States, and I think develop strategies that are really important on how to mentor across different identities, different racial and ethnic groups, different sexual and gender identities, different religious identities, generational differences. And these are things we can use in many different settings, although it might look different depending on the country or the institution you're operationalizing or you're working in. So, and this is comes from Rutgers University. They have another great website if you want to know more about inclusive mentoring. And then I also want to mention SIMR. You can see the website at the bottom. Again, you'll have it in the slides. They actually, and I just attended this for the third time this summer, practice and implement a training called Culturally Aware Mentoring, which really focuses specifically here in the United States on how to have conversations across racial and ethnic identities when that might be different between a mentor and a mentee, and real skills associated with that. So they have a lot of great resources. I'll share some of those throughout this training. And again, even though it's a US context, some of these things are really transferable to other settings. So please feel free to take a look at that website now or as we wrap up. And again, I'll kind of return to some of these ideas a little bit later on. So colleagues doing really important work at SIMR, so take a look. I've mentioned and alluded to already that there are different types of mentorship. Informal, meaning maybe you don't even call that person your mentor, but you do rely on them for really important advice and guidance, as well as formal mentorship, which we tend to talk about more with research teams or in research mentorship, especially if we're funded by the National Institutes of Health. That requires a very formal mentorship. It's written into grant proposals. We have an individual development plan, which is a written document. I'm going to talk about this in our next session that outlines the goals of the mentee. We have a formal mentee-mentor agreement that outlines the responsibilities of a mentor-mentee. Both of these types of mentorship, although we are talking more about formal in this series, are critical to success. So one is not necessarily better than the other, but they serve different needs, right? But we do need often formal mentorship for research careers because of our funding and our institutional requirements. I'm mostly talking about research mentorship here in the context of TB and really supporting and sustaining TB research. And in that case, with research mentors, we're talking about mentors that have a set of experiences, a set of methodologies, published work, a track record of funding in a particular area of TB research, and then those mentors are supporting more junior scientists. However, sometimes when we talk about mentorship, we talk about career mentors, and those mentors may still be researchers or likely are researchers, but perhaps with a different specialty or a different focus area, maybe in a different institution, maybe they're a dean or a chair or they're in administration and not conducting as much day-to-day research, but can still provide very important and helpful mentoring guidance. And so often when we're talking about mentoring teams, it might be that as a mentee or as a mentor, you're participating in these teams where one of you is really serving as the expert in terms of the science and research area, and another one might be there to provide more general guidance on time management, making leadership decisions, other aspects of a life. And all of these things can be really important for career development for a mentee. And then I don't talk as much about peer mentoring and group mentoring, but I did just want to acknowledge that often there is mentorship among peers that can be really critical and provide important support, or perhaps mentors meet with groups of mentees at a time and guide them through important career development stages. There is some literature on these types of mentoring that's mentioned in the Influential Mentors book. So please take a look at that. There's more in that text in the writing and in the chapters as well as in the reference center. So all really important things to consider. And I guess the summary here is there's lots of different types of mentorship. It's all critical for success. You might need it at different times in your career. And that particularly our focus really is thinking about research mentorship in a more formal way throughout this series. All right, I'm going to pause again and just, you're welcome to unmute and ask a question, or at this time you could ask a question in the chat. You just see if you have anything you want to clarify, or if you want to add anything we've missed so far. Okay, great. So to get more into the details of where we see mentorship happening and the areas that are typically covered, I know sometimes when folks are new to mentorship, they're not sure even, what can I ask for from my mentor? What should I expect from my mentor? What is really falling within the realm of what mentorship should cover? I hear this a lot, particularly from people who either mentorship is kind of new to them culturally in the country they're working in or the institution they're working in. I also hear it here in the United States a lot from first generation students, scholars, and faculty that maybe haven't had mentorship prior in their careers and really wanting to know, like sometimes saying to me, I don't even know what questions or what I should be asking for. Right. And so as mentors, we can really help in this scenario by saying and explaining in our meetings, here are the things I can do for you. And these are some typical areas we see mentorship being really important: grant proposals and submissions, research projects generally, and in specific methods within those research projects, writing, manuscripts, presentations, publications, how to engage in collaborative team science, how to be a leader, whether it's just in small committees or larger university roles or institutional roles, how to get promoted, entry into new areas of specialty or methodologies, teaching roles, clinical practice, a lot of help with decision-making across areas of a career development. So also with timelines. So when should I do what at what time, navigating politics. And then of course, this last bullet point, really connecting mentees to professional networks, right? So broadening a mentee's exposure to the field through the people that are in it, conducting excellent TB research. So these are kind of the areas of research, but what I'd love to do is pause now and have you write in the chat. So given that we've defined mentorship, and we know kind of the scope of some of the areas mentorship might be able to support a mentee and support with career development. What characteristics do you think a mentor needs to have to be successful in their role as a mentor? So if you would type into the chat now, what characteristics does it take for a mentor to be successful? What do you see in a mentor? What skills must they have to be successful? I'm going to pause and let you type some ideas. So what are the characteristics of a successful mentor? Feel free to unmute and speak if you want, or add it in the chat. Patience, yes, that's a good one. Yes, we do. Sometimes I think as senior mentors, we forget what it's like to be a more junior person. And it is important to be patient and understand who they are, meet them where they're at so we can be successful. Generosity, Jyoti, that's a great one. And by the way, great to see you in the chat and on the call. Yeah, good listener, being understanding, open-minded is another great one. Really allowing room to explore the skill set of the mentee. What do they understand? What do they know? And how can you as a mentor guide them? Good listening, active listening is a really important skill. Being committed is also important, and that the mentee knows you're committed, right? Because you will likely have bumps in the road at some point in the science that's being conducted or in your actual relationship. Willingness to devote time. Yes, Karen, I really like that comment because there's a great kind of short article about like 5 ways you know your mentorship is working. And the number one way is that you are meeting regularly. You know, mentorship might have a lot of communication over email, but in my mind, you have to actually meet with each other on a regular basis, or mentorship cannot really occur. And that could be virtually, it can be on the phone, but time and meeting together is really important. So yes, communication, being empathetic and flexible, absolutely. Sincere and honest, critically important. Let's see, did I get everything? Generosity, accountability. Yes, actually holding a mentee to their goals and what you've set out for your relationship, all critically important for success. So feel free to keep adding those ideas to the chat. You've mentioned a lot of these already, but certainly one of the things we want to do to be successful is in the beginning of the relationship, communicate, as you mentioned in the chat, and set clear expectations. Again, that's the topic of our next month, using individual development plans, mentee agreements, the mentor map, and a few other tools. Collegiality, introducing the mentor to collaborators, exchanging ideas, right? So one ways that mentors can be patient or also provide time and resources is by actually sharing examples of things that they've produced, grant proposals, manuscripts, presentations, or even things like how to run a good meeting, how is it they've managed their time and balanced all their activities. Exchanging those examples and ideas is really critical to that mutual relationship. Another thing I don't think that's come up in the chat yet that's really critical is giving credit to a mentee and a mentor for their work and contributions. That's something, especially with shared authorship, that's really important to discuss up front and to feel and to have conversations about, right, between mentors and mentees. Troubleshooting is another key area that's really important for a mentor. So I often hear from mentees, one of the most valuable things about having a mentor is that they've already made a number of mistakes, and hopefully they can share the kind of ups and downs of a career as a researcher and how a mentee might avoid some of those same mistakes that a mentor made. So that does require a relationship, I think, that is built of patience and understanding and listening and good communication so that those conversations can take place. Okay, let's see. A few other things to mention in terms of strong mentorship. A mentor needs to be accessible. There needs to be meetings between mentors and mentees on a regular basis. It may vary depending on the intensity of the research project and what a mentee may need. So some mentors and mentees meet weekly, others meet bi-weekly or monthly. And then perhaps, and I'll share this in a minute when we talk about the phases of mentorship, as we move on and as mentees become independent, they may need fewer or less frequent meetings with their mentor, but still, again, there's that commitment to be accessible. Listens with an open mind. Those were things that were mentioned in the chat. Thank you very much for the folks who mentioned that. Being honest, even when it's difficult, I think that's part of the accountability that was mentioned in the chat. If we want mentees to stay on target, sometimes as a mentor, that means delivering some kind of straightforward advice and being really clear about expectations when timelines need to be met, right? Grant submissions and writing needs to be addressed. Deadlines are important to be respected. All of those things must be communicated openly and honestly. And patience, as people already mentioned in the chat, really recognizing that mistakes or missteps or sometimes being delayed in progress is part of mentorship. And then the last piece that didn't come out in the chat, although it often is mentioned, is that the idea of being inspirational. And I think mentors are inspirational to mentees, and mentees are inspirational back to mentors, adding a lot of value into their careers and their own scientific thinking. So that can be really important in mentorship. Anything we've missed? I'm going to pause for a minute and just see if you have any questions that you want to ask in the chat, or feel free to unmute, or anything you want to add to those lists that we just discussed. Okay, well, one thing I wanted to add too is, I've mentioned this a bit already, but it is really important. It takes two, as they say, or maybe more than that if you're in mentoring teams. And so we've talked just a bit about the characteristics of good mentorship, but really we need to have positive attributes and characteristics in the mentee side as well, and behaviors that really lend itself to strong relationships. And here's a list right here you can take a look at as I'm talking. But really bringing as mentees, so for those of you on this call, I think almost 100% of you said you were mentees still while being a mentor, reminding ourselves that, we can manage up a little bit, share resources. We can be really thoughtful about the feedback we receive and how we incorporate that feedback. Let mentors know what was really helpful, what really worked for you, right? Sharing new technologies, using your own organizational skills to optimize your meeting times with the mentors. Generating and sharing new ideas and perspectives that might be helpful for their science as well as yours or your collaborative projects, right? Really letting them know that you're eager to attain your goals, and being forthcoming when you're having challenges and mistakes so they can be addressed immediately. It's always best guidance that when there is a challenge or a concern or a problem, from a mentor and a mentee's perspective, to address that immediately so that a solution can be developed and hopefully implemented. Because again, mentorship kind of might go like this, up and down over the course of a relationship. So both sides to create good mentorship. And that is really important because I always show this slide, particularly I do trainings like this one for mentors and mentees, and sometimes I spend sessions just working with mentees on how they can really be a good mentee to benefit from the mentoring relationship. And I really love to share that it is a mutual relationship. And this slide in front of you is showing this, is that mentors, from our research, we know, receive a lot of positive benefits from the relationship as well as mentees. So mentors learn about generational differences. They feel inspired and greater senses of satisfaction from their work. They learn important leadership and management skills as a mentor. They learn important communication skills. There's that word again, communication is so critical to success. They report more satisfaction with their daily work lives. They report new ideas about their science and feeling invigorated again about their own work. They have new teammates and colleagues, which really excites them. They often receive recognition for their mentorship, and that also is really beneficial to their own careers, and they feel inspired, right? And as we've already mentioned, we know mentees receive new skills, guidance, support, and the ability to develop and achieve goals in their careers that maybe would not have been attainable without the support of a mentor or a mentoring team. And then some indication that promotions are more likely to occur. They're more likely to stay in organizations. They're more likely to perhaps have higher incomes. and a stronger commitment to their work in the organization as outcomes to mentorship. And I think also this last bullet point here, also mentoring allows us to be connected to community. And this is really important to have a sense of belonging in an institution or a research team, kind of minimizing senses of alienation. And as you know, as academic and researchers, we often spend a lot of time alone. Mentoring is one way we can ensure that we're connected to broader professional networks as a mechanism of support in our careers. Also, I'd like to mention, because we're looking at mentorship, of course, in this series, as I showed in the beginning, across the multiple levels of influence in the social ecological model. So we've talked about those individual level benefits and the relationship benefits. And research also shows that mentoring helps our overall culture in our institutions and organizations and our productivity. So we're more likely to have a productive, diverse workforce. We're more likely to have a culture that emphasizes relationships and the value of relationships and learning. It strengthens our retention and planning efforts throughout the organization. It allows employees, staff, researchers, academics to really better manage careers. It increases self-confidence, improves communication, and really preserves and shares this institutional knowledge and culture. And so we also know people who are mentored are more likely to go on and become mentors themselves, again, then kind of increasing this cycle of building a strong culture of relationships, communication, and sharing knowledge and wisdom over time. So a lot of benefits individually, and relationships, as well as this organizational level. So some highlights from the research from you. Again, let me pause if there's anything you think missing here or you think we could add to this list. I'd love to see it. I'm monitoring the chat, so feel free to speak up. I think one of the last things I'm going to get to today is kind of summarizing some of the things we've talked about by saying that mentorship can look different over a period of time. I really like the idea of knowing that mentorship can last, different periods of time, and it might look different, and we might need different skills based on the phase we are in of mentorship. And that's one of the reasons why we feel like these sessions and this series is so important, because I know many of you on this call have been a mentor 5, 10, even some of you longer years. But sometimes we need a refresh on thinking about what skills do I need right now in this kind of unique time that we're in the world, to make sure that I'm being the best mentor that I can and also being efficient, so that I have and maintain my own career. And so when we're thinking about the phases of mentorship, that first phase initiation, which may happen in the first 6 to 12 months, again, depending on the type of program we're using as an example for mentorship. But there is kind of this new excitement in this initiation period of mentorship. We're inspired. The mentor is excited about the mentee's possibilities. The mentees are excited about new sources of support, wisdom, and guidance. They're kind of discovering who they are in the course of this relationship. They're also doing this groundwork. So a mentee is thinking about their research and really doing what they need to launch and develop the skills they need to become a researcher. A mentor is perhaps thinking about how to support their mentee in terms of professional networks or the skills they might need to teach them. There's connection being built. They're kind of doing their individual work, but bringing it into their meetings together to start collaborating on this mutual relationship they have to really build this career of the mentee. And often very high expectations in the first 6 months or so of this relationship that then, as we move into cultivation, are tested, right? And so we're all human beings. We all have strengths and weaknesses. And when we get into this period of meeting regularly, life gets complicated. There might be delays in meetings. Things might be canceled. There might be external forces. For example, in the last several years, we've undergone some major external forces that have changed how we've mentored, COVID being one of them in the United States, social movements, political movements, a political environment, which can affect our science and our careers as well as our personal lives, all things that are really important to consider in mentorship. So sometimes, again, starting with these idealized ideas about mentorship and then moving into this phase of those expectations being tested. And that's why next session, when we talk about setting expectations, it can be really important to have some tools in place to make sure we're starting strong and we have mechanisms to communicate all of these changes that might occur over the course of a relationship and stay on track. Of course, feedback, critically important at this point in the relationship. Psychosocial support, we've talked a bit about role modeling, career support, all of those tasks and responsibilities we've mentioned already today in play and in action here. So that's these two areas are really what we're talking most about throughout this series and throughout track as we're offering research support and we're building research collaborations. Most of our mentorship will probably fall into these first two areas. But it's important to remember that really the goal of mentorship is to reach these final stages, which is as a mentor, ensuring that our mentees are establishing independence. And that as mentees, we're doing everything possible to meet our goals so that we can establish independence, right? And so as a mentee grows and accomplishes their career goals and starts building independence, it's likely they may need less or different things from their mentor. And that's what happens in the separation stage. A mentee is establishing independence, refining their relationship. There might be some negotiation of those changes and how to maybe end the relationship or decrease the need for support. And then eventually, there's typically some redefinition where the mentor-mentee become more like colleagues and peers, right? And then the mentee themselves goes on to become a mentor, hopefully learning some skills from their mentor on how on research, but also how to become a better mentor, and new support systems are in place. And it will be important, of course, for that mentee as they grow in their career to set new and additional goals, and mentors perhaps go back and take on new and additional mentees and think about their own careers in the process. So I like to share this larger picture of mentorship to know that we need different skills in different phases, and that the more intentional we are about thinking about these relationships, the better off we'll be in the beginning to ensure that our mentees meet their goals. And as mentors, we feel satisfied and happy and continue with our own careers as well. All right, let me pause again. That was a lot of talking, and just see what experiences do you have about mentoring, or what questions do you have about the phases of mentorship in your own experiences. And I'm just curious if you would, some of you, tell me if you see yourself in any particular stage. So do you feel like you're in initiation? If so, just write initiation in the chat. Or do you feel like you're in cultivation? You can write that in the chat. Or have you experienced this phase of kind of redefinition? I'd love to hear from you where you see yourselves in these phases. All right. Maybe still thinking that over, or a little quiet in the chat, but that's okay. It's a lot to take in. Initiation. Hi, Sarah. Nice to see you. Initiation with your new mentee, cultivation with others, and redefining for myself. Yes, absolutely. Okay, great. So maybe a little bit of everything for some of you. Yep. Cultivation. So some of you here kind of in the meat of your relationship. And they do say that the initiation is probably the first 6 months to 12 months, depending again on if you may have a mentor agreement that's 2 years. You may not have a time-bound mentorship. So it's hard to say exactly how long or when each stage would happen. But certainly I think cultivation is after 6 months, you've known each other for a while. This may last several years before you get into this separation. Again, depending on if you're on some sort of research training grant, the grant may dictate kind of the time of these phases that might happen, right? Some of you again in cultivation. Okay, great. On the last
So maybe could I share something?
Yes, please do.
Jyoti? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to comment that like within large research groups in science, some of these things, obviously are simultaneous because people are in different stages and you're mentoring multiple people. But I think one of the things that I've realized over the last, 20 years or so is that even when there's been a separation and people move on to different aspects of their careers, there is a certain responsibility as a mentor because you continue to write recommendation letters, you continue to help network and support, and then sometimes the mentee helps you open new lines of job opportunities for people in your group. So I think, the cultivation process continues even beyond.
I really like that comment. Does anyone want to build on that or jump in and add more? And thank you so much for unmuting Jyoti and jumping in. Anybody else?
Sure.
You want to build on that and your experiences and share? We have a few minutes. I think that's a really important point about research teams and how I really like how you said that as a mentor, we can continue to think through and be responsible for maintaining relationships, and that even if people leave our research teams, they may go on and be important in the lives of the new people we have on our teams as mentors or as hiring them into positions. And again, it's part of that exposure to broader scientific networks that we can offer as mentors. And yeah, and recognizing that there's different approaches based on where people are, and that this kind of diversity of phases, even with a team, can be really beneficial because there are really great and inspirational things about being in each one of these stages. And Kristen, I like your comment about thinking about closure, because often I think that is a piece we don't talk about or we do explicitly. I've often heard from people that typically a mentorship will just kind of fizzle away more than having a meeting and saying, like, now our mentorship is over. Like, that's not very often that happens. But I do think there are times when mentors, how do I say this? Where mentors are ready for their mentee to launch, right? And I think knowing the phases and having more deliberate conversations at times for mentors in their own careers and they're managing their own time, it is important sometimes for mentors to have the ability to say, I've really offered you everything I have, and I'm going to connect you to another person who can help you now. And I'm going to then mentor another person who is still in my area or my specialty and who could really use my skill set. And so sometimes when I've worked with mentors who are feeling like they have too many mentees or they need to kind of refocus where they're at in their career, maybe they've received a new grant and they've had new projects, or they're moving into a leadership position, that understanding mentorship can change over time can allow really important conversations to happen. Maybe not about closure, but maybe about redefinition. So I think that's really important. And it's funny because I'll just share my own experience here, is that in my own mentorship, I did not have this conversation with my mentor, but I knew when redefinition happened because we went to lunch one day, which we often did. And the first question wasn't about my research. The first question from my mentor wasn't about my career. It was about some family thing or a vacation or activity that was happening outside of our responsibilities. And it just felt very peer-like. And I remember that meeting, this was 10 years ago or even longer, in my mind still to this day, because the feeling was just different. And it wasn't that we weren't friendly and collegial all along, but it just felt like there was a different or a relaxing of responsibility. It was just, now I'm going to help you as a peer, not as someone who's being maybe more as your accountability partner, right? There was just a shift there that I felt, and it felt very confusing at the time. But now when I look at this, it was very clearly this point of redefinition, right? And so I think it's helpful to know that this may happen, even if we're not explicitly talking about it. So interesting. Yeah, interesting experiences. And thank you for sharing. Is there anybody else who wants to share a mentorship experience that you've had along the phases, or anything else we've talked about so far? I'd love to hear from you, even in the chat, or you can unmute. And I can't see you all, and so please just unmute and speak if you want to jump in. Okay, I'm going to move forward with really the last slide of today. This is the reference I mentioned earlier. It's a textbook and a website, The Science of Effective Mentorship and STEM, and they have great resources. And one of the things they share is this kind of wheel of thinking about mentorship and how we can concentrate and build skills in research mentorship and support mentees. I'm not going to go into each of these areas today, but I'm leaving it more as a framework and a thought for you to leave with, and something we can return to throughout the series. So we've talked a lot about, the kind of definition of mentorship and how mentorship looks for the mentee and the mentor and the benefits of that. And here are some a nice wheel to think through. I like this as a reflective piece, even as a mentor and a mentee. Where are the strengths of my mentorship and where might I need more? And also, these may look different over the phases, right? So not everything is needed in the first 6 months of mentorship. Surely we want research comprehension and communication skills, critically important, especially today as science is often under attack. How do we make sure we're conducting rigorous TB research and then communicating that to the people who need it? Those practical skills of actually conducting the research, research ethics, an important part of all of our research training, often also required by the National Institutes of Health and other funding agencies. Professional and career development. So those skills that go along with strong writing, again, maybe perhaps sharing and disseminating science on social media through scientific conferences, all the skills associated with that. Working in teams, critically important. Equity and inclusion, awareness and skills. So thinking through how might I be addressing questions of health equity in my research, but also how am I thinking about equity and diversity in my own research teams and also in my relationships and my mentorship. And then these bottom two, which I feel like sometimes we're less clear on, but are important to consider. How do we build the identity of a researcher in our mentees? How do we continue to refine and think about our own identity as a researcher? How does that influence the topics we address, the methods we use in our professional networks, and how we hold ourselves in science and scientific communities? And then what confidence might that take, especially for those of us who are mentoring more junior and scientists? How can we help support them and build their own confidence, again, toward that goal of being independent investigators, right? So critical, important. So kind of food for thought as you move forward and you reflect on your own roles as mentors and mentees. And again, we'll send these slides out to you, but this is a great resource for you to take a look at if you have additional questions. Here it is again. And with that, you can put the evaluation link in the chat if it's not already there. We have time for a few questions, and then also we would love to hear your feedback on today's session so we can incorporate it in future sessions. We will have more engaging activities in some of the additional sessions that we have. I talked quite a bit today to get kind of the foundations down for subsequent sessions. So please